my panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The debanking scandal continues as Santander and Lloyds have closed 300 defence accounts over fears of ethical compliance. So not only has debanking threatened freedom of speech, but now it's threatening national security too. Natalie Elphicke, who was allegedly firmly on the right of politics and once mocked Sir Keir Starmer as Sir Softy, has defected to Labour. I'll be giving my view. Israel has launched its long-expected Rafah offensive and vowed to eliminate the remaining Hamas battalions in the city. I'll be joined by an Israeli MP who also attended the Oxford pro-Palestine protests today. And like the prodigal son, it seems the King's schedule is too busy. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a particularly pugnacious panel this evening, historian and broadcaster Dr Tessa Dunlop and the founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. As always, as you know, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Sam Francis.
Jacob, thank you very much, and good evening to you. It's 8 o'clock, and the headlines from the newsroom this hour. Another of Rishi Sunak's MPs has defected to Labour, the second in under 2 weeks. Natalie Elphicke announced her decision just 2 minutes before Prime Minister's questions. The Dover MP said Rishi Sunak's government is chaotic and claims that Labour has changed. Well, some of her now former Conservative colleagues have been reposting old social media messages from Natalie when she criticised Labour. Dan Poulter made the same switch to Labour less than a fortnight ago when the Conservatives lost hundreds of councillors and the Blackpool South by-election last week. Speaking shortly after defecting, Ms Elphicke said that a Labour government promises a brighter future.
In 2019, the Conservatives stood on a manifesto that was very much centre ground. But under Rishi Sunak, they've abandoned the centre ground and broken many election promises. Meanwhile, under Keir Starmer, Labour have changed. And I think that change is going to bring a much better future for our country. And that's why I was so keen to join the Labour Party and play my part in bringing that important future forward.
In Scotland, meanwhile, Kate Forbes says her appointment as Deputy First Minister there is a moment of extraordinary privilege. She'd been promised a significant role by John Swinney after deciding not to stand in the leadership election herself. Ms Forbes, who only narrowly lost out to Humza Yousaf for the post of leader last year, takes over from Shona Robinson, and she remains in Cabinet in another position. Russia is promising an appropriate response after the UK expelled one of its defence attachés. The Home Office claims he is a spy. Several Russian diplomatic premises are also being shut too, while there'll be new restrictions on diplomatic visas. The Home Secretary says that Britain is trying to dismantle the Kremlin's intelligence gathering operations, a move that's also supported by Labour. We've heard today that a father whose teenage daughter, who took her own life after watching harmful content on social media, says that a draft plan to protect children online doesn't go far enough. The media regulator Ofcom says platforms must take action to stop their algorithms recommending harmful content to children or face significant fines. But Ian Russell, part of Bereaved Families for Online Safety, wants to see the safety code strengthened to make sure that the world's biggest platforms, he says, better protect children online. And finally, some royal news. Prince Harry heard cheers as he arrived today at St Paul's Cathedral in London for a special event marking 10 years of the Invictus Games. During the service, the Duke of Sussex gave a short reading in front of representatives from various participating nations and some injured servicemen and women.
There are varieties of gifts but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone.
Meanwhile, less than 2 miles away, the King was holding his first garden party of the season at Buckingham Palace, though we've been told by a spokesperson yesterday for Harry that the monarch's full programme means that the pair won't be seeing each other during his short visit to the UK. Those are the latest headlines from the newsroom. Another update at 9 o'clock. In the meantime, to stay across all of the latest news, you can scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. The purpose of a business is to make money for its shareholders. This has been true since the dawn of time, or at least since the dawn of business. Up until recently, businesses were expected to obey the laws passed by Parliament and any regulations that flowed from such law. However, in the last few years, something has dramatically changed with the rise of the sinister phenomenon of environmental, social and governance, ESG, as an overlay above and beyond the law of the land. So banks and other businesses have taken it upon themselves to enter the field of politics, with their business decisions being determined by some higher overarching power. And there's no better example of this than the case of the debanking of our own Nigel Farage. Nigel's case revealed a lot more than the political biases and malpractices of NatWest executives. It revealed debanking to be a nationwide phenomenon. Following Nigel's debanking scandal, the Financial Conduct Authority proved itself to be about as good at its job as Dame Alison Rose was, after issuing a report claiming no one had lost their account because of their political views, seemingly ignoring Nigel's subject access requests, which proved precisely the opposite. But the good news is the Treasury Select Committee has been following this issue more conscientiously, and the revelations have been extremely worrying. In February, it revealed that UK banks forced the closure of 140,000 small business accounts last year, nearly 3% of all small businesses in the United Kingdom. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. Not only do they employ 16.7 million people, generating £2.4 trillion a year for the economy, they also play a vital role in our communities, providing opportunities for economic mobility. But it doesn't end there. Today's revelations from the committee have shown that Santander and Lloyds have shut the accounts of 300 defence companies. Now, they're not the bogeymen, particularly in this, because other banks simply didn't provide these data, and it suggests that the figure, therefore, could be even higher. I couldn't have said it better than the Treasury Committee Chairman and Conservative MP, Dame Harriet Baldwin, who said, "We cannot have organisations in this country systematically debanking legitimate firms or industries because their board turns its nose up at their line of work. If their work is legal, then they should be able to access a bank account." So not only has debanking posed a serious risk to free expression, but now it is posing a risk to our national security. It doesn't end with mere threats to free speech and national security. Energy security remains under threat, with regulators discouraging investment in fossil fuel companies. It's only recently that climate change was one of the 4 critical policy aims that the government vacuously instructed the Bank of England to prioritise. The ESG-driven debanking agenda is woven into our government institutions. Not only does the supposedly independent Bank of England issue highly contentious, politically driven commercial advice to banks without a democratic mandate for doing so, but the Financial Conduct Authority, that miserably failed to investigate the debanking scandal, is compromised too. In September last year, it, again without a democratic mandate, along with the Prudential Regulatory Authority, issued proposals that would force firms to, quote, develop a diversity and inclusion strategy setting out how the firm will meet their objectives and goals and set targets to address underrepresentation. The issue goes right to the heart of democracy. Fundamentally, it is a political ideology capturing our non-democratic institutions, both in the public and private sector. Without a mandate from the British people, this ideology is now threatening our ability to conduct business, our nation's energy security, and our national security. It also affects freedom of speech and should be stopped. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog at gbnews.com. But joining me now is the Emeritus Research Professor at LSE and former MOD advisor, Gwydion Prinz. Gwydion, what a pleasure to see you. How has ESG got into the bloodstream of British business?
I think it's completely appalling, the report that Harriet Baldwin and her committee have produced, which you just summarised. It's come in because this is the leisure of the theory class, to invert Thorsten Veblen's title of his famous study of what the leisure class do, the theory of the leisure class. And what ESG does is to, as you said, to produce a series of criteria which have no status whatsoever. The fundamental line, surely, is the one which Dame Harriet produced and that you quoted, which is if it's legal, then it should be banked. But my worry is, as somebody who is deeply involved in and interested in defense, is that this is not just consequential. I think it's really very sinister, because such moves, where will they command the greatest pleasure? Who will smile most? Clearly, it'll be Xi Jinping. Clearly, it will be Mr. Putin. If we are in a position where we are going to self-harm ourselves, the last time I checked, the defense of the realm was the first duty of government. It's not an optional extra.
Absolutely, and these obligations won't be placed on Chinese and Russian companies. But is it even legal for British companies? Don't they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders, primarily to make money, rather than to follow a woke agenda?
Of course they do. And if a bank is going to prioritize these ESG criteria over those duties, which is how you began your monologue, then, frankly, investors should draw their own conclusions. But let me give you the analogy which this all brings to my mind, and it's a properly military one. If the United Kingdom was a ship of war, if this was HMS Great Britain, and if it was in Nelson's navy, we are at a state in international affairs where we are going to action stations. We know this because the Secretary of State for Defense reminded us in his Lancaster House speech, and just yesterday, I think it was in Washington, the Chief of Defense Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, said very much the same thing. Now, what does that mean? It means that a Marine drummer beats to quarters, and in going to action, what do? You clear the decks. You get all the detritus out of the way so that the ship can be properly fought. And my view is that the moment has now come when all these luxury beliefs, like these ESG things, they are virtue signals. They are a sort of form of intellectual conspicuous consumption. They go over the side. They clearly have to go over the side because they impede.
Gwydion, that seems to be fundamental, what you're saying, that these are luxury opinions in times of plenty and peace, but that when war is on the horizon, you have to become serious again. And these ESG policies are a lack of seriousness.
Well, absolutely. And it goes further because, of course, there is a direct connection between what we might call hard defense, that is to say, ships and planes and tanks, and the other issue which you mentioned, which is energy security. It's something which I also work on, as I think you know. And
indeed.
The way in which we are allowing the energy security of our country to be weakened and undermined by, frankly, entirely unscientific projects such as net zero. This is the luxury belief to end all luxury beliefs, and we are beating to quarters, and over the side it must go.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Gwydion. I'm now joined by public policy researcher and former Coutts employee, Oliver Lewis. Oliver, thank you for coming back in to discuss this. What do we do as a country if ESG stops us doing all the things we're actually good at?
I mean, both you and the American press make a number of very good points. I mean, Margaret Thatcher, I think, hit the nail on the head. You know, this country has to produce something. We have to produce wealth, and our defence sector, you know, is one of the sole sectors that is still one of our, you know, national champions, for want of a better phrase. So if we continue to undermine our micro enterprises, dare I say, the campaigns to the Church of England and so on to disinvest from BAE Systems, you know, major international defence company, where are we going to generate our wealth from?
And it has a real consequence, doesn't it? Because if investors are less likely to invest in BAE, then for BAE to do business becomes more expensive because the people who will invest in it expect a higher return. So there is a real cost that you can identify by limiting the pool of investors.
Absolutely, and these huge multinational firms which generate most of the FTSE 100's income, margins, and the income that goes into our pension funds and pays for our energy bills that Professor Emeritus was referencing. If we're not home to these multinational firms, those profits will go elsewhere. The investment will go elsewhere. BAE Systems, perhaps at one stage, I think there is still a golden share in BAE Systems, so perhaps they can't just up stocks and leave. But we need to be championing the success of these firms and not doing them down. And this politicisation of who judges the fairness and the justness? When it's beyond the rule of law.
It's politicisation, but not by politicians. And the Bank of England has rules trying to make it harder to lend money to energy companies. But surely that's none of the business of the Bank of England.
No, absolutely. And I think there is a disturbing mission creep in a lot of our national institutions, which, it's how we get our institutions back so that we're sort of at the standards of really the 1990s, where the rule of law was clear, everybody knew where the boundaries were. The Bank of England, became independent in that decade, but there was quite a sort of almost a club capitalism idea of the culture of business in this country, coming off, obviously, the wave of entrepreneurial Thatcherism, which, of course, has transformed this nation's standard of living. And getting back to that culture is a political project, and that's really where we're going to have to end up going, I think.
And the failure of regulators, and I'm thinking particularly of the FCA, in protecting investors is notable. And instead of concentrating in protecting investors from malpractice and fraud, it's decided to go on for diversity and inclusion. Is that because it's
probably easier to do? No, it's easier to do. And obviously heaping layer upon layer of regulation and requirements and codes, which, as you say, beyond the rule of law, if you like, just makes doing business much more expensive. It's quite interesting. You look at the head count. I remember when I was in the banking sector, that the head count of the compliance teams. I mean, when I joined in 2010, I think that the head count in one of the large multinational banks I worked for was perhaps 100 in London. By the time I left, it was about 2,000. This burgeoning teams.
Which is a cost on business.
Of course it is. And all good salaries, really nice, high salaries.
But it has to be paid for by your customers.
It does,
Is
absolutely.
there a kernel of good thinking in ESG, that you want companies that don't despoil the environment, that govern themselves well, that take some social interest in the communities they're in?
Absolutely. I mean, no one's going to say no to those things. But obviously where the issues become contested, such as let's say 50-50 gender representations. Of course, nobody objects to a clever, intelligent woman achieving the highest possible position in society they can reach. But when you say, well, we're going to give preference to a certain type of position or job on the basis of your gender, that is obviously mission creep and is the definition of anti-meritocracy, really.
And it's the inclusion of certain companies automatically. So defence became... arms manufacturers just became automatically bad.
Absolutely. And of course, I think that's bound up, obviously, with what's going on in the Middle East. So it's particularly disturbing. I mean, we were talking about Shirley Williams earlier. You think of her mother, Vera Brittain, George Lansbury. It's very noble. It's a bit like the environmental piece, and it's wonderful to champion peace. But of course, you have to be ready for war. Always. You always have to be on a war footing.
If you want peace, prepare for war.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver. Coming up, did the King really snub Prince Harry? Not once, but twice, as suggested. Plus, the age-old excuse, my dog ate my homework, is out. It's far more fashionable to blame Brexit now.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Between 1955 and 1989, an average of 55 nuclear tests were conducted across the globe each year. More than 30,000 young British and Commonwealth servicemen served at British test locations in Australia and the Pacific Ocean. But in the years since, those who were involved say they've been ignored and lied to about their exposure to radiation. For decades, Lab Rats International has represented the millions across the world exposed to fallout from the testing programmes and the families who still suffer today from illness and deformities. Last year, the government unveiled the Nuclear Test Medal, recognising the military, civilian and overseas staff and personnel who participated in Britain's nuclear testing programme in the 1950s. But for Labrat's founder Alan Owen, whose own father was a nuclear test veteran, the work is only just beginning. In September, they launched a legal challenge to the Ministry of Defence to provide the test veterans full medical records, which they say they've been denied access to.
We sit in this bubble as the nuclear test veteran community, fighting against the establishment. And they will say, you know, ministers will go in Parliament and say, all you've got to do is apply for your medical records and they'll give them to you. You know, it just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. They're not there to as easy, as accessible as just applying. They will fight you all the way. They will delay it.
In response, a government spokesperson said, "We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, which is why we have formally recognised them with an official medal. Nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service have the existing and long-standing right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme." The fight for these veterans and their families lives on, because thousands who came before never got the recognition and justice for their service.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, we were debunking banking and talking about defence companies, and the mailmogs have come in. George says the government could tell the banks to stop the debanking of firms and individuals by threatening their licence. Instead, they allow it because these same banks will take the heat when the government takes us to a cashless society. We should carry on with cash. Taxi drivers prefer it, and we like to support taxi drivers. Alexander says, could it be time for legislation making it illegal to close someone's bank account with without a court order? Well, as you may have seen, Natalie Elphicke has decided to cross the floor, to the bafflement of MPs on both sides of the House. What do we think prompted this once staunch Conservative to have a sudden conversion to socialism? Well, I'm joined now by my panel of historian and broadcaster, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, and the founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Tessa, you're of the left.
I consider myself more of a progressive liberal.
All right, but that's of the left anyway. Do you think Natalie is in any way of the left in comparison to you, or has the Labour Party aimed its arms to a hard-nosed right-winger?
Well, it's interesting because she wasn't hugely on my political radar, if I'm honest with you. I'm sure she's very important to the people of Dover. And she has certainly become suddenly more prominent. Immediately, my cynicism kicked in and I thought, oh, clearly she's just trying to bag a seat. But then, when you dig in, no, she's not intending to be a politician after the next election. So you have to question...
Has she said she'd refuse a peerage? I don't think she said that. That would be an interesting thing to say.
A peerage is a slightly different question, but she's not standing for re-election in Dover, to be clear. So it's not about her trying to maintain her hold in that constituency. And so that made me think, well, she's a politician who really must care about the issues. She's basically nailed herself to the stake of migration and housing. And actually, when you dig into your government's record on housing and on migration, they're possibly your two most pronounced disasters.
Her complaint on migration is that we haven't been right-wing enough.
Funnily enough...
And she's been absolutely savage about the Labour Party's incompetence.
Well, what's fascinating is that it is under the Conservatives migration has ballooned post-Brexit, and you would agree with that. I mean, 1.5 million, the majority of which, incidentally, are legal, that your government gives us levers to allow them in.
There's been much more illegal migration because they all turn up in Dover.
So she's focused granted on the small boats, and she clearly believes that Keir Starmer's very thought through 5-point plan has more possibility of working than Rwanda. Why are you turning away at that?
Because
Why does
his
that make you
well-thought-through
go?
plan makes everybody laugh.
Yes.
Peter, this is such an odd decision, isn't it?
It seems very odd. Her reasoning, I had never heard of her either, I have to say. So I take it, you know, your word for it that she was staunchly conservative, etc. I mean, it's just opportunism, isn't it? I mean, or what could it possibly be if she's not standing? And also, for that matter, you know, to be concerned particularly about immigration and housing, you know, Labour Party is incapable of having a discussion about housing with actually talking about immigration at the same time. It just doesn't happen. They just completely ignore it. So it's a bit of a mystery. And also, it's sort of so completely diametric. I mean, it's not like even Churchill going to the Liberals. Really.
Well, it is, because we're in the two-party system, and previously it was Liberal-Conservative and now it's Conservative-Labour. But just to pick you up, actually one of the very few concrete policies that the Labour Party have is the big build, the 1 million-plus houses. We haven't seen the equivalent from the Conservatives. And I think there has to be an emphasis on what the options are. If you want to stop the small boats, we all know that Rwanda is pie in the sky. Yeah. Jacob knows that. It's one of the reasons, one of my issues.
I don't agree with that, but she could have gone to reform, or she could have gone to
But clearly she doesn't believe that helter-skelter...
Reform believes in what she believes in. She was a member of the ERG. She was a staunch Eurosceptic. She was one of Boris's final supporters. Okay. It's just a very odd thing to do.
I think it's extraordinary. And also... utterly pointless.
No.
I mean, it will bewilder most people.
Possibly it suggests, worryingly, from a progressive Liberal point of view, the Labour Party have tacked so far across to the right.
That's an interesting point.
They're actually sitting or parking their tanks on your lawn.
That's a very interesting point. But we're going to move on to higher matters, because it has been reported that our sovereign lord the King has snubbed his son, the Duke of Sussex, for a second time in 24 hours. The King has chosen Prince William to lead Prince Harry's old regiment by making him the Colonel-in-Chief of the Army Air Corps, while today Prince Harry celebrated the 10-year anniversary of his Invictus Games with a service at St Paul's Cathedral. This comes after speculation that the King is too busy to see his son during the Duke's fleeting visit to the United Kingdom. A spokesman told the press that Prince Harry will not be seeing his father during his visit to the UK, owing to the King's full schedule. Well, I've got my panel with me. Dr. Tessa Dunlop and Peter Whittle. Peter.
Yes.
Couldn't they have managed to find half an hour?
It would seem odd, would it not, Jacob? You know, he's here for... How long is he here for, Harry? I don't know. But, I mean, just 10 minutes, sort of. But, I mean, the point about these sort of issues, particularly with the royal family, is that we're whistling in the dark, really. We don't really know, actually, the characters involved. But one's instinct is that I can't imagine that the King, who seems a very sincere man and, from what I can gather, quite a religious man as well, that he would actually kind of be vindictive about not seeing his son.
Well, in The Prodigal Son, the father sees his son in the distance and actually runs to go and greet him. It's a very different story from this one.
Yeah, I do feel that irrespective of what goes on behind closed doors, and I think we always grapple or fail to forget that it's not just a personal family, it's also a thumping great institution, that a little bit more thought could have been given to optics. It doesn't appear redemptive or kind to prevent your son from seeing you, even if it's just a, hey, Dad, how you doing? Here's a ghastly present from California and a cap to cover your bald patch. You know, that's all it takes.
Well, that's the way people should speak to the King, even if they're...
Well, but he's his dad. He's his papa, isn't he?
So he's the King.
Well, I believe that Harry, you know, we know that they have a father-son relationship, which I thought that in his book Spare, which I bet neither of you two read and I did, I'm not sure whether that's a point of pride or not. In it, he says, you know, my father wasn't equipped to be a single parent. And you get this sense throughout Harry's life that he's pretty low down the pecking order. There's always been royal duties when Charles was Prince of Wales. There was, of course, warring parents, a dreadful divorce, boarding school, which, again, takes you away from the family home. And I just feel this, in so many respects, compounds the problem. This is about, arguably, you know, all this kind of hoo-ha regarding the Sussexes leaving is about this pain that Harry feels, and the King's doing nothing to say, hey, I'm sorry about that, or let's try again here.
Yeah, but Tessa, I mean, I would say that most people you know, I think that they would be on the king's side, if you like, in this, because the amount of kind of damage that that couple have wrought on the royal family, on the royal family, and frankly, I think people are fed up actually with even hearing from them, and their various different PR launches and all of this sort of thing. So I think, frankly, I think most people will be sitting at home thinking, well, actually, you know, fair enough. You know, you've just done nothing, actually, but cause them grief.
And, you know, Peter, a lot of people will, because the only narrative they are spun is the one that's cast through the predominantly right-wing press, which castigates Harry and Meghan. Arguably, he could have gone so much further. Yes, he was a man in pain. Yes, he made mistakes.
With Harry and Meghan, it's quite simple. Listen, when they were married, there was the most extraordinary level of goodwill towards them, extraordinary level of goodwill, and it was by their actions and what they said and what they implied. Basically, people went right off.
But we're today now. We're not pre-2018. And the truth is, at that service, Harry was flanked by the Spencer family, and in the Royal Garden Party 2 miles down the road, you had the King surrounded by his family, and whether they like it or not, it looks like two sides of a trench, and you know it.
Isn't that always the feeling that any conversation anyone has with Duke of Sussex will be in his next book? And the royal family can't risk that.
And do you know what? The King could just say, hi, son, how'd you take your tea these days? I mean, they don't have to have profound conversations about prostates and bowel movements. Really, they don't.
Thank you so much to my panel for mentioning that particularly. I'll see them again shortly. But in a moment, I'll be joined by an Israeli MP who attended the Oxford pro-Palestine protests earlier today. Plus, the draconian net zero targets may force Ford to cut the sales of its petrol cars in the United Kingdom.
Hello, good evening. It's been another dry and fine day for many of us, and there'll be more in the way of sunshine to come tomorrow, and it should be a warmer day for most of us. However, cloudier skies are starting to approach the northwest as this weather front moves in. Won't make too much progress overnight further elsewhere across the country as high pressure is building in, so it should be a fairly clear and dry night for the bulk of England and Wales. Cloudier skies will affect parts of northern England, Northern Ireland, and in particular much of Scotland, where the rain will turn quite persistent across the northwest overnight. So quite a damp night to come, probably a damp start to the day. But elsewhere, it should be a bright and mild start to the day. Quite widely, temperatures will be in double digits by Thursday morning. Any mist and fog that has formed overnight should clear quite readily. It's most likely across coastal areas across England and Wales, and that will give way to another day of long-lived sunny spells, and it's going to feel warmer in that sunshine than today. And the sunshine should spread up and further north into northwestern areas of Scotland as that weather front pushes north. Highs of 22, 23, possibly 24 degrees across central areas of England on Thursday. Again, there's a risk of mist and fog to start the day on Friday. The sunshine could be a bit hazy first thing, but it should brighten up quite quickly through the day. And I think most areas will see a day of long-lived sunny spells. And once again, it's going to be feeling fairly warm. Long-lived sunshine to come on Saturday. A risk of showers on Sunday, but temperatures are climbing towards 25 or 26 degrees.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nigel Farage, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's Tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, the mailmogs have been coming in, and John says, I don't blame Charles for not meeting Harry. The way he has denigrated his own family has been an absolute disgrace. And Alice says, Elphick is an opportunist. It's that simple. Well, I'm absolutely delighted now to be able to discuss the Rafah offensive, which is so important, because the Rafah offensive has raised concerns from world leaders, including the US and UK. The UK has warned that Israel risks committing war crimes if it continues its major military operation after concerns that its assault will result in human catastrophe. On Monday, the Israel Defense Forces called on 100,000 people in eastern Rafah to evacuate. Back home in the United Kingdom, Oxford and Cambridge University students launched Gaza encampments on campuses as protests across UK universities spread. My next guest attended one of the pro-Palestine protests at Oxford University today, and I'm very pleased to be joined now by the Israeli MP, Sharon Haskell. Thank you so much for coming in. What did you see when you went to these protests?
It was actually really sad to see that. I mean, it's not the same type of protest that we actually see in the United States. But fact is that these are, I'm sorry, but, excuse my language, but useful idiots at the service of radical Islam. Israel war at the moment, it's not a territorial war. This is a cultural and a religious war. This is radical Islam that's waging war on our values, on our belief, democracy, liberties, equality.
And that's very interesting because you have a reputation as being quite a liberal member of Knesset, and you've been in the Israeli parliament for 9 years. But you've recognised the threat of this war and have taken quite a hard line on that in spite of your otherwise quite liberal views.
Absolutely. I mean, for 9 years, my fight in the parliament was how to shape Israel's future, to reduce regulation and bureaucracy and taxes. And you know, we've been talking about limiting the power of the unions. But once the 7th of October happened, everything's been pushed to the side because this is a fight on our survival. This is going to dictate whether my children, my 3 babies, are going to be able to have a future in their home, in their country. What we've experienced on the 7th of October, that is the worst nightmare a mother can ever imagine. It actually came into our reality. And the only mission that I have right now as a parliament member is to make sure that this thing will never happen again.
But what limits should there be on Israel's response? The Rafah crossing is being dealt with at the moment as we speak. But what responsibility does Israel have to minimise civilian casualties, and particularly the casualties amongst children?
So if we look on the actual numbers at this moment with the new numbers and figures that actually came this week, you see that the numbers are very close to 1 casualty per 1 terrorist that was killed during this war. It means that academies are going to study how we operated because the amount of civilian casualty, and honestly, every casualty, every civilian casualty is heartbreaking. But there was never, ever in the history of urban warfare a country that had these amount of numbers and casualty. This is the lowest amount that ever had in history. And I think we can go back all the way to the Second World War to actually see that. These numbers are fact. It's not emotions. Any death is a devastating event, but every operation we do is targeted, and we make sure that there is the least casualty possible. We warn ahead. We give leaflets. We give warnings to evacuate from these areas. And so, you know, unfortunately, sometimes there are mistakes, and these are the casualty who pay the highest price.
But we hear that with the warnings that are given, some people move and they don't have food and they don't have water, and therefore they're faced with a false choice that if they stay, they may face the Israeli Defence Force. On the other hand, if they go, they may find conditions that mean it's very difficult to survive anyway.
So I think this is part of the tragedy that the Palestinian people have actually experienced in regard to how the United Nations actually address them. I mean, look, we've been in this war for now 7 months. Okay, if the United Nations would have applied their rule or their operations of humanitarian aid as they apply it in so many other conflict area and disastrous area, take, for example, Sudan, almost 25 million refugees and displaced people. Okay, you have UNICEF now supplying almost 6 million children clean water. I mean, look on what's happened in Syria and in Afghanistan. They are the only one that can actually operate this kind of humanitarian disaster, but they refuse to come in. Why? Because when we look on UNRWA, where the United Nations are actually giving them the mandate to supply humanitarian aid, this corrupted organization that Hamas is literally controlling, stealing the humanitarian aid, incapable of distributing it, is making a complete failure. And when donating countries said, we want to give funds, humanitarian funds, not to UNRWA, but to any other organization that supplies humanitarian aid, Antonio Guterres told the organization not to accept this fund, to not compromise UNRWA. It means that the United Nations prefer not to compromise a corrupted to the core organization who is led by terrorists instead of actually supplying real humanitarian aid to Palestinians who are in desperate need to that humanitarian aid.
And what is now happening at Rafah? There's been a lot of international pressure on Israel not to go into Rafah from the United States and from the United Kingdom. And obviously the US, your most important ally, a shipment of arms has been stopped in relation to it. So what's actually happening now, and how responsive to international pressure is Israel?
So, look, the last 4 months, there has actually been a quiet ceasefire trying to negotiate a deal. I mean, the only thing we want is to bring back our family members who were taken out of their beds into those dungeons of Hamas. And for 4 months, there's been a quiet ceasefire in Gaza. There weren't major operations. I mean, for 4 months now, you probably have heard and reported that Israel is attempting to go into Rafah, but didn't. It means that they had 4 months to evacuate. They had 4 months to create plans. And unfortunately, 4 months of discussions that led to no deal to bring back our family members. And it means we have to go in to bring them back and to bring them back alive. So we've started a specific targeted operation in a certain area in Rafah, and we have taken the Rafah crossing. So from a strategic perspective, we need to take the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia crossing. Try and imagine, imagine 2 major gates between Egypt and Gaza. What is Hamas is actually bringing and taking out of there? Arms, and they take taxes on goods, but there's not many goods that are coming in. So they're bringing in arms. Israel has to be able to control this border where they brought missiles and weapons and deadly machines that were made in Iran to create as much devastation as possible.
Well, Sharon, thanks so much for coming in. I completely agree. Hamas must be defeated. It is essential for the security of the West, and we have to recognise that Iran is a threat to us all. Coming up next, a writer has blamed the flop of his new musical on Brexit. Well, you know what they say, a bad workman blames his tools. Plus, Ford has announced it's ready to restrict petrol car sales in the UK because of the draconian net zero rules.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Prince Harry, remember him? He appears to have fully turned his back on the UK as he listed his primary residence as the United States for the very first time in papers published yesterday. So interestingly, Harry listed the date on the formal US residency forms as the 29th of June 2023, last year. So that was the very same day he was kicked out of Frogmore Cottage in Great Windsor Park by his dad, the King. Charlotte, thank you for joining me.
Okay.
Are we just putting two and two together here with the significance of this date? Because there were stories during the rounds today that Harry chose that date specifically because he was so hurt about being booted out of Frogmore by his dad.
Yeah, I mean, to me it feels like he's trolling his dad a bit, because he could have said that he's been a US resident since 2020 when he quit the UK and moved to the States, but instead he chose the exact day that his dad kicked him out of Frogmore. But the reason his dad kicked him out of Frogmore was because he'd slagged off Camilla in Spare. And, you know, and his dad, apparently it was a really difficult decision for Charles, because, of course, no dad wants to kick their son out of their home. But he went beyond the pale. So Charles took the difficult decision to say, look, Frogmore's been empty for years anyway. We've spent £2.4 million doing it up for you. And now you've, you know, insulted our family in your book, Spare. Why is he so hung up on Frogmore? Because this is the country he was desperate to get away from. This is a house he didn't particularly want to live in and, in fact, didn't live in.
Well, he was forced, by the way, to pay £2.5 million to fund the renovations after it all kicked off. I mean, would that have anything to do with...
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that sort of galvanised his anger towards the whole situation. He thought he was getting a fantastic freebie. And there was, you know, there were a few reports at the time that Meghan actually thought she was moving into Frogmore House, which is a much grander property. And she sort of felt a bit sort of tricked or confused and hadn't quite realised it was actually a cottage, which is only a mere, I think it was only a mere 8 bedrooms.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, the creator of a West End musical has blamed Brexit after his production was forced to close early. Rufus Wainwright has claimed that West End audiences lack curiosity after Brexit and claims his work was too European. However, the uber-woke, Brexit-hating New York Times says it desecrated the original film, while the pinko New Statesman said it was chaotic and masochistic. What will Brexit be blamed for next? And, my children, if you're listening, it won't be accepted as an excuse for not doing your homework. Well, I'm joined now by arts editor at The Express, Stefan Kyriazis, along with my panel of historian and broadcaster, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, and founder of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Well, Stefan, thank you very much for joining me. Is this the most unlikely thing to be blamed on Brexit yet? Was it just a turkey?
It was... I'm a little bit embarrassed for him because basically the fact is the show wasn't very good. It should not have been put on a West End stage. It wasn't ready. It was messy and confusing. People were leaving. It was terrible. I was there. And I'm sorry, I feel Rufus's musicals are supposed to have music that you enjoy, that carry the story. His music did not do that. His music was subpar as well. So on every level, it did not work. So it's a bit embarrassing that he's a bit like in the old days when they used to be saying, oh, English food. Europeans used to mock our food. We now have the best food in the world, every choice possible. We're open to everything.
We've slightly lost the line, I'm afraid, Stefan, so I'm going to move to the panel. I'm going to go to Peter first, because it's brilliant, isn't it? Everything gets... do you remember the BBC used to say, in spite of Brexit?
Yes, exactly.
That has faded, but now, anything that people don't like...
It is. I think, as you pointed out there, I mean, some, very sort of reputable liberal publications have criticised this. It's obviously a rubbish musical. It's a turkey. And people have gone from it. What I find interesting about this, actually, though, Jacob, is that these kind of criticisms, accusations of being narrow-minded, being bigoted, the worst people are, in fact, the cultural establishment. You know, when it comes to all the big issues of our time, including Brexit, they absolutely speak as one.
Well, I think we've got Stefan back. So, Stefan, if you are back, I might just ask, is Rufus Wainwright actually a generally good composer, capable man who's just had a turkey, or is he somebody who we won't hear much of again?
He's highly successful within his field. For me, it's a little bit like there's a show on at the moment at the National Theatre, London Tide, has music by PJ Harvey. I gave both shows 1 star. They both seem to be written by songwriters that are very much more indie. Musical theatre requires a certain type of music. It has to carry the story. It has to carry the audience. You can't navel gaze and be a little bit esoteric about it. It is a thrusting part. So I think they're the wrong people for these shows. And you can feel like they are determined not to write a song that sounds like it should be in a musical, which is ridiculous and does not work.
So are we just two of us old-fashioned and we like Guys and Dolls, which I think has been on very successfully recently, and Anything Goes and things like that, and actually we don't really want to be challenged. We want to have a jolly evening with good music.
Well, I think everybody wants good music. Everybody has different choices of what good music, but we have Next to Normal coming back. That deals with mental health issues, the same as opening night. Thrilling rock score. We have Standing at the Sky's Edge, all about Sheffield and council estates and the 80s. Fantastic music, rock music. We have Hadestown that mixes up soul, spirituals, a little bit of blues, New Orleans, but it's about Greek myth. Amazing score, beautiful, transformative. I felt like I was dreaming. So no, just write a good tune.
Excellent. That's the answer. Thank you very much, Stefan. Write a good tune. That's a good thing for a musical. Ford is preparing to cut the sales of petrol cars in the UK to try and hit our lunatic electric car sales targets, a move which is almost certain to push up prices for you. Martin Sander, the general manager of Ford Europe, has told the Financial Times that the only way to avoid crippling fines is to divert the shipments of petrol cars elsewhere. Ford is the first manufacturer to announce that they plan to reduce the sales of petrol cars to comply with these foolish measures. Will they be the last? Well, back to my panel. And Tess, you didn't get in on the musical, so you can get in on Ford instead. Should we make a musical?
I feel like that's the Duff card. You know, I'm not allowed to give my curated cultured opinion on London theatre and Brexit, but you have dumped the petrol-guzzling Ford machine on my lap. What surprises me is, as a canny politician who's seeking re-election, Jacob, that you don't take a leaf out of the highly successful, unprecedented, third-time re-elected London mayor and look at how he won his campaign on ULEZ, on cleaner air for London, on the reality of living in a city where we breathe.
He didn't really win on ULEZ. He really didn't win on ULEZ.
And allow me to explain that London pollution has come down, nitrogen dioxide, in the centre of London by 65... Right now, the air we're breathing in here, 65% improvement. It happens... The way you do it is to hit people in their pocket.
The reason nitrous oxides went up so much was because the government pushed us, the Labour government pushed us to have diesel engines because they were obsessed by removing carbon dioxide. It was all part of a bonkers environmental plan.
Petrol and diesel lead to greater pollution and lead to climate change.
Petrol engines are now extremely clean.
I'm sorry, Jacob, you can't for 1 minute pretend that petrol is preferable to electric
yes, I can.
when it comes to pollution.
Much better.
This is all beside the point, because this is all part, as we know, of, as you said, the general environmental plan, net zero, which is absurd for us. It's going to cost trillions, right? It's going to be so damaging for most people. And in fact, do you know what our carbon emissions are globally? Britain, what we are responsible for, is something it's like 0.9%. Meanwhile, China is 32%, right?
That is such a tired argument, Peter.
It is not. It is the argument. It is the argument, right? And therefore, what we do is of no consequence. Right. But at the same time, what we're seeing now, particularly like in the case of these cars, is that essentially the government is trying to, basically put legal limits on the market, for example, which is what this is about. It's utterly ridiculous.
I don't know if you do your own grocery shopping, but have
Yes,
you
I do.
been... Right, do you buy potatoes?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Are you aware that they've almost doubled in price?
They almost doubled in price in
They've become the cost of truffles.
1976.
And do you know why? Because of global warming, because of the... Even farmers believe in climate change today.
In 1976,
because of
we
the
had
constant
very
rain.
high potato prices. It sometimes
Now you
happens.
sound like a nutter, Jacob.
No, I don't.
Just that one spurious day when there was a hot summer.
Potato prices go up and down. That's the market. Anyway, thank you to my panel. English cricket icon, the wonderful Monty Panesar, who was always a joy to watch playing cricket because he seemed to enjoy it, has been stumped by political reality. After a week at the crease, he briefly put the world in a spin. But now he says he needs time to mature as he quit George Galloway's Workers' Party and headed back to the pavilion. I prefer it when cricketers are Tories, so I hope Monty Panesar will join us in the Conservative Party in due course. Anyway, that's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, I went to an illegal migrant tent camp and spoke to them about why they came to Britain, how fearful they are of the Rwanda plan, and what their life has been like since they were actually rejected for asylum. That's at the top of the 9 o'clock hour. At the top of the 10 p.m. hour, it's Robert Jemrick. He's smashing the latest myth about migration.
That'll be very interesting. Robert's always important to listen to with very insightful thoughts into the British political situation. Everyone won't hear that. That's all coming up after weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset, you know how glorious it will be. Look at the skies behind me in the picture. That blue will be the blue in Somerset. Tory blue skies.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. It's been another dry and fine day for many of us, and there'll be more in the way of sunshine to come tomorrow, and it should be a warmer day for most of us. However, cloudier skies are starting to approach the northwest as this weather front moves in. Won't make too much progress overnight further elsewhere across the country as high pressure is building in, so it should be a fairly clear and dry night for the bulk of England and Wales. Cloudier skies will affect parts of northern England, Northern Ireland, and in particular much of Scotland, where the rain will turn quite persistent across the northwest overnight. So quite a damp night to come, probably a damp start to the day. But elsewhere, it should be a bright and mild start to the day. Quite widely, temperatures will be in double digits by Thursday morning. Any mist and fog that has formed overnight should clear quite readily. It's most likely across coastal areas across England and Wales, and that will give way to another day of long-lived sunny spells, and it's going to feel warmer in that sunshine than today. And the sunshine should spread up and further north into northwestern areas of Scotland as that weather front pushes north. Highs of 22, 23, possibly 24 degrees across central areas of England on Thursday. Again, there's a risk of mist and fog to start the day on Friday. The sunshine could be a bit hazy first thing, but it should brighten up quite quickly through the day. And I think most areas will see a day of long-lived sunny spells. And once again, it's going to be feeling fairly warm. Long-lived sunshine to come on Saturday. A risk of showers on Sunday, but temperatures are climbing towards 25 or 26 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News.